Hey folks, welcome back to Gaming Garbage Road. Take a look at games, chat about the gaming news in the industry, and of course, stream for fun. So we've been talking about Marathon for a little bit, and it was bugging me while I was playing, while I'm listening to other reviews of some people liking it, some people not. And my personal opinion is that the game is mid, and there are some things that I like about it, but I still feel like there's something drastically missing from Marathon that other games have, and it almost feels incomplete. Now, it finally dawned on me while I was at work. So, what I do like about the game is that the gunplay I feel is pretty good. It feels somewhat similar from Destiny, of course. Also, how well the game ran. We had very steady FPS. There were basic bugs for PC, and those drastically need to be fixed, and those shouldn't have existed. Also, the cinematic cutscenes. They got me excited until I actually got into the gameplay. There's also removable attachments, which they added. They also added proximity chat. So, in one experience, I was able to talk a player down, and we both were able to extract, which was wonderful. There's also different factions in the game for different gear and upgrades. And two, the game is also pretty challenging, even with the UESC, the NPCs. And it is satisfying when you actually accomplish stuff, especially as a team or during solo. We also have changing weather. There's rain and fog and even cold temperatures that can help your overheat meter accrue more slowly. Also, usually the sound design I think is very good, especially the weapons. But I'm also kind of a weapons guy, so I generally like that. And it's okay too to be really excited about Marathon or even to really like or enjoy the game so far. But still, I felt like something was missing, and it was missing by design, and I couldn't really put my finger on it. But Marathon doesn't really have a dynamic structure to the game like maybe other players are expecting. So go ahead and hang in with me. When we take a look at Destiny 2, there are options of what you can play, and you can also meet random players in the world while you're exploring or collecting resources or just kind of exploring the map a little bit. There's also a social hub too, and this kind of creates this dynamicism between your involvement, other players, the story, the lore, the characters, it all kind of comes together for you to create a immersive experience. And it's nice too that you can jump in and jump out of games or strikes or whatever. You can basically do what you need to do when you want to do it, and there's a ton of optionality there for you. We also have this somewhat to a degree in Division 2 and in Helldivers and in Arc Raiders. Even Arc Raiders, they have a PvE versus a PvP matchmaking system. If you're more likely to shoot first, well, you get queued into PvP. Or if you're more likely to be helpful or just look for gear and extract, then you go into a PvE type of matchmaking. And again, it helps kind of create this dynamic system of kind of creating these experiences that you don't necessarily expect. And there's also NPCs across all of these games that also help to create kind of different environments, different experiences, different enemies, and all of that kind of stuff. And we get to enjoy that. When we take a look at Marathon, well, it is what we expect. It's an extraction shooter, and we know what it's going to be. There's no real surprise. There's no real uniqueness there. Now, of course, we have heard that there are going to be some raids, but I'm waiting to see those. So the design itself is really all around the solo experience or solo team experience, and that's really defined. That's really kind of specific and even a way static. So players will ultimately get tired or bored and they'll go back or they'll work on playing something else, leaving the sweatiest players in the game. And ultimately, they'll just make it more sweaty, they'll make it more difficult, and then you'll probably find yourself, even if you're a pretty good player, no longer really having that fun experience. And regardless of extraction shooter or whatever else, this is what seems to happen every single time with PvP games, is that the multiplayer is not just multiplayer, it's pretty much strictly PvP focused, even though if you're in a team or something else, but there's always a focus of constantly struggling against the other players instead of working with them. And so the demo showed us that, already this is basically what's going to be. And that's enough for a lot of people to say no at the game, especially to the $40. And I think what people are expecting is that something more, because we're talking about kind of the pedigree, even though the studio is not the same. I understand that. And I think a lot of us do. But like, this is the studio with the legacy of Halo and the legacy of Destiny for over 10 years. And then, well, we have Marathon, and that's just kind of all it is. See, the thing that's crazy to me is that in the demo, while maybe we're not seeing everything, maybe there are different modes. We're sure too going to be getting different maps, and there's maybe probably going to be different bosses too, and maybe even raids, of course. We'll have to see that, but still, it doesn't really change the overall dynamics of the game. Again, we know what it is and we know what to expect. And so this doesn't really make me like the game or really hate the game. I'm just kind of indifferent because there's really no surprise there. And I think the possibility is there, but even though there's kind of disappearing extractions or there can be hazards in the world or too some nice quality of life things where you can get experience no matter what or even shared progress on your quests, it still just kind of makes the game feel static. And I think that's the issue that people are having. But something really could have been built different here with Marathon, something that would kind of be worthy of what Bungie is, of what we know them to be, at least with their legacy. They could have built a real time faction system that is directly or indirectly able to affect players according to their faction. Maybe you don't necessarily get to stay with that particular faction, but we know that Tau Ceti is basically an abandoned colony and planet, and well, companies want the resources, and so that's a perfect bed for conflict and strife, but you don't really feel that in the game. You know that that's what's happening, and then you also have the UESC that is protecting the planet and also is willing to fight back over that territory, but again, it's not really what you would expect. Again, the demo just basically showed us that all of this stuff is kind of there, and some parts of it can feel good about the game. But if we had an entire faction system where we're all fighting over the planet, and even later being able to be a part of these factions to work toward gear for a month or for a season, and being able to switch back and forth to work towards something else, and what you do actually affects and changes the world and the map, or you get some benefits towards your team if you're able to take over some territory or take over a node or something, that would be much more interesting, and that would feel much more of an evolution of what Bungie has already built. Instead, Marathon feels like it's kind of backed off, it's kind of devolved some from what generally a lot of us are expecting the game to be. Again, this is not necessarily a perfect system, but that would definitely make it much more interesting. Because again, the resources are there. Also, too, you would expect ships to be out in orbit. You could add that as patches later. You could still add events to the world that can change or be kind of limited time events for gear or resources. And you could fight over that with the factions. And you could create missions that were more PvE focused or PvP focused, being able to appease both sides of the crowd. You could also have it too, where if something is being attacked, well, basically you could select another type of mission to ultimately defend that type of outpost or territory against other players or even NPCs. So again, there would be a lot of dynamicism there, a lot of difference in whatever that they could do, along with events and changing of factions over time and everything else. And that, again, would be very interesting. And I think a lot of us would be willing to pay a $70 price tag for that type of a world. It would be, of course, more dev time, but it would be something that would be a lot more interesting. Because I think Marathon's problem right now is, again, it just does not meet expectations. We see the dev time that they've had of roughly almost 7 years now, and this is all that we have. And there's more dynamics and different mechanics and kind of more haptic feeling in the world when we play some of these other games. And then Marathon is just that kind of static extraction shooter. So ultimately, what do you guys think? I really think that's what's missing from Marathon. And yeah, there is no way to go back. But when you start to really think of that type of real-time faction system and fighting over resources, whether against environments or other players, there's really no way to unsee that. And if you go back in and play, it's just like, yeah, that would be better. So anyway, that's just something to leave you guys with, because I really think that's what's missing. And I'll have another video later talking about that if Marathon ultimately fails, what that looks like for Bungie. So with that, folks, thanks for tuning in. I'll see you guys on the next one.